18th. I'd like to call to order the Administration Committee meeting. Let's do a little roll call, please.
Supervisor Peavy.
Here.
Supervisor Peterson.
Here.
Supervisor Ard.
Present.
Supervisor Cook.
Present.
Supervisor Long.
Here.
All right.
Thank you. And I know we have a variety of other staff with us today for a variety of agenda items. Thank you for joining us. We had three different sets of minutes. Any comments or corrections on any of the minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as published. Any public comment? One of these days we might have somebody show up, so I'm kind of looking forward to that. Okay, okay. Let's move right on to the first business item, financial report for July.
Thank you, Chairman Long. So where we're at in the financial report is we're 7 months in. So we should be expecting to see 41.67% of the budget remaining. So that's sort of the target mark that we're looking for after I get through these minutes. All right, so you can see on the top line, 41.67% remaining. That's our target of where we want to be looking at on the budgets. As we scroll through the budgets, there's really nothing terribly interesting in most of the departmental budgets. Everybody's pretty much on target. If you look at the wages and fringes on a few of them, you'll notice that there's a higher amount left over. Because of the hiring freeze we had, we ended up with some savings, and we're starting to see that a little bit now when we look at the percentages of budget remaining. That hiring freeze was lifted as of September 1st, though, so there's a lot of recruitments going on to fill those vacant positions. And then when we get down to page 30, would be the next one that I'll point out. On page 30 is the health insurance fund. So health insurance makes up 10% of our budget, so it's kind of a big deal when we're looking at 10% of our budget on a single page. So I take a close look at that one normally. And if you look at where our expenses are this year compared to where they were last year at the same time, so the operating expenses were at about 3.8 million compared to about 4 million last year. So we're on target, actually just slightly better than where we were last year, and last year was a good year. So there's a lot of COVID-related issues into the health insurance fund and usage and stuff because a lot of elective procedures aren't getting done or haven't over the past few months. So we're realizing some savings from that, and you can see that on this expense page. The other page that I'll point out then too is on page 32 of the packet is our retirement health savings. This is the payout of long-term sick bank when employees retire. We're at 176,000 of the 200,000 we have budgeted, and we will be going over again this year. And so that's kind of been a trend. Every year is kind of up and down. It's not a very flat line at all. But this year we will exceed the expense amount that we've budgeted again. And typically what we end up doing is having to reallocate unallocated fund balance in order to cover that year's loss. And then the last point, page I'll point out, we'll also scroll through the capital projects. But then on the sales tax report, and I think County Administrator Thompson had mentioned it, but the last 2 months have been back-to-back sales tax months. So for the first time ever, we exceeded $1 million in a month for sales tax. So we've had record months for sales local to St. Croix County. A lot of that might be related to the fact that people aren't traveling, so they're staying here and they're making their purchases locally. So that might be one factor. Or people stocking up on supplies might be another factor. I don't know. But the data shows that we've had 2 back-to-back record months, and we're well ahead of schedule from where we were last year. Are there any additional questions on the financial report?
Can you tell how much of that is due to the government purchases?
Yeah, it does not break it down that way. I did find a chart on the Department of Revenue that breaks it down by service sector. So like you could look at restaurants and bar sales tax compared to where they were last year. That one was slightly lower, obviously. And a lot of the other ones were higher. I couldn't find any though. Probably the restaurant and bar was the biggest one with a deviation. So looking through the different classifications, I didn't find any huge deviations really other than that one.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, we get to move on to the 2019 audit report.
All right. For the audit report, we'll turn it over to Brock from Clifton Larson Allen. And I have him online here with us. So I will get to that part of the packet, Brock, and you can talk me through what pages you want to look at.
Could I preface the presentation very quickly?
Of course you can.
If I may. Just a quick comment. I attended the board meeting last summer when it was the audit, would have been the 2018 audit report was presented. And I wasn't on the board at that point, but as I looked around at the faces of the supervisors, I saw a lot of deer in the headlights faces. And so I just wanted to suggest, I mean, we're all fairly financially savvy, but I just want to suggest that the more concise and clear and simple you can present the information to make sure that not only we as a committee understand the results of the audit, but it's really important for the board to really have a good understanding of the results. So it's okay if you kind of act like you're talking to teenagers or something along those lines. So anyhow, enough said.
Yeah, we're not hearing you, Brock. Our best audit report yet. We've left them speechless.
It's all very clear.
Do you have any complaints about that explanation?
We have to do our own kind
All right, you want to give it another try, Brock? We changed something on our end. Or anyone online if they want to talk to make sure it's not on our side.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
Yep, we hear Corporation Counsel Cox.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, I'm on hold.
I think we could hear you, Brock, through your
Can you hear me okay now?
Yep, we can.
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry
about that. Oh, man.
Okay.
Okay, let me see if I can get this,
Go feedback in my ear. All right.
all right.
That's not
That's
okay.
not
on your
okay
end,
on
is
your
it?
end, or is it?
That's fine. Okay. Sorry about the trouble here, guys.
Yep, I actually muted
Oh.
your phone. We're picking you up through the computer audio now.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So the let me just start by introducing myself. I got Jonathan Sherwood. You can see him on the computer as well. He kind of leads the fieldwork aspect and pulls a lot of this stuff together. So he'll help out as needed tonight as well. I think I'll start out first by recognizing some staff here, because on your end and the county end, a lot of efforts went into preparing for this 2019 audit. As you know, counties their audits don't really start till April, May timeframe. And that was during the most restrictive timeframe of COVID too. So your team had to adjust to that pretty significantly. They did a nice job. They were very responsive, and we still met all the normal statutory deadlines related to your audit. So appreciate all their efforts as well. All right. So getting into this, I'm going to start on the summary page. So I think, Ken, you're going to have to scroll up. I'm going to cover the information on page 1 first. So those of you that are kind of new to this report, it's structured in such where I give you, this summarizes all the reports that we provide. Okay, so we're looking at a lot of different things other than just the numbers during an audit, but this gives you a feel for what the results were. And then we talk about the numbers on the next several pages. So I'm going to cover these first, just so you understand what we're all working with here. And the first one is on the audit opinion on the financial statements themselves. So I don't know if you have a copy or if you received your copy of the entire financial statement. That's the 90-page booklet, has all the details, and it's very technical. It's very structured according to standards. Try to break it down here in a couple pages so it makes a little bit more sense for most people. But there's one particular page in there where we issue an opinion, and we tell you if there were any problems with the numbers or the disclosures, and there weren't. We've issued an unmodified opinion, which means it's the highest level you can receive, and it means all the amounts and disclosures in that booklet is materially correct. There is some additional language. So again, if you're going to set this side by side to a prior year report, you'll see an extra paragraph in there. All that's talking about, it's not a problem, it's just talking about implementation of a new reporting standard. So won't get into the details of that, but that's what that means. There's some change in the reports from the prior year that the standard setters wanted implemented. From there, we do issue a report on internal controls. That's different. So now here we're not necessarily talking about the numbers, but we're talking about the controls in place to ensure the numbers are correct, that controls over compliance and things like that are being followed. So we do have two things here, the report. Prior year and last year, there was a third item, so there's improvement there. There was an issue with some bank reconciliations, and that issue was addressed, so it wasn't a problem for you in 2019, so that's some good news. You do have two here, though, and again, if you haven't seen these are very common, particularly in governments, just because of the nature and the size of the organization. Now, counties aren't very large organizations, but that in itself actually causes some issues too with the second item, limited segregation of duties. So I'll talk about that one first here quick. But what this one means is when we look at how the accounting's done, we like to see certain things split up. The problem comes in when you have very competent people doing multiple tasks. Okay, that's pretty much the common denominator in our governments. You've got like a single person doing more than one thing. We call it incompatible functions. So they're maybe doing a certain part of the transaction and then they jump in and do a different part as well. So in an ideal situation, you'd have clear segregation, you'd have different people, and you'd have a controls in place that wouldn't allow that to happen. It's just not practical. You're not going to hire more people to solve the problem or this reportable issue. What you're going to do is you're going to rely on your controls. So we test those controls. We didn't find a problem associated with those, as far as error or fraud. It's just something you live with and you have controls to mitigate those risks. So that's what that is. It's more of an informational thing. It's important for you to know as a committee that this does exist. So your controls, as far as what you're reviewing and approving, is very important. You're part of this control structure. So keep up those duties there, and that'll help. The first item that I skipped over, 2019-001, all that tells you is that we as auditors came in and posted adjustments to your books. We do that for almost all our clients. It's very common, and the standard setters tell us we have to put this in here as an item. But I've said this year after year, we don't consider this a significant problem, and inherently there's issues with the number of entries or the issue of the entries themselves. That's not the case here. These are pretty routine annual stuff that we help clean up each year. In the middle of the page, one last thing that I'll probably note here is compliance and internal controls over compliance. So this is a little different. here's where we're looking at your grant programs, contracts, things of this nature, and we look to see if the county's in compliance with those requirements. And we have no findings to report here, so that's good. That you want to keep that clean because that could impact your funding sources, for example. So very good results there. All right, I'll move you down now. Well, first of all, I'll ask if there's any questions on that. Does that make sense, what I went there before we talk about the numbers?
One question for you, Brock. The material audit adjustments, if I read this report right, questionable, but was that related solely to the nursing home or not? I thought I saw the documentation for that particular item within the nursing home data.
Yep, you would have seen that there too. So that's a good observation. That's in this a separate report that we do issue. But it is also an issue at the nursing home. I would say it's not exclusively related to it because it's actually applicable to most of your funds, general fund, highway, some of your other fund, most of your other funds as well, debt service fund. We help pretty much ensure everything is in the right place, and oftentimes we have to step in to do adjustments to either reclassify or adjust because maybe a technical accounting issue comes up. A good example of that is when you issue debt. Oftentimes, depending on the nature of that debt, we have to gross up the activity. Sometimes it only comes through based on the cash flow of it. So that would be a good example of one where we would, we see this every day when we look at all our clients. So it sticks out to us and then we adjust it to gross up that activity. The nursing home did have some entries as well. I think all in all, there was 40 some entries, which isn't unusual for a county. If you think of how many transactions you have every year, there's a lot that potentially could get, that could need correction or adjustment, and that's what those represent. Okay, good question. I will then dig into some of the numbers here. So what you're looking at is a 4-year trend. So we do that so that you can kind of see how things are changing and how you can react to them, for one, but I also condense it down. So what we're looking at here, for example, might be several pages in the 90-page financial statement. So it breaks it down into one page. I know there's a lot of numbers here, but I'll try to point out just certain ones. The first thing I'll have you look at is at the screen there, it's kind of towards the bottom. There's current year change, if you can see that. And in particular, that total fund balance. Yep, you got the cursor right there. So what that tells you is a lot of people maybe refer to this as net income, net loss. This is the operational results. You can see you had positive results of 319. That tells us that the revenues exceeded the expenditures by 319,000. You can see the trend there. It's been up and down a little bit. Some of that's been kind of dependent on transfers out to other funds. Baked into this number here is an operational positive results, even in spite of a $3 million transfer out to the capital projects fund. So, I mean, it was planned, you transferred money out to help support purchases of capital expenditures that didn't occur in this fund, but just know that that was in addition to your normal operations of this fund too, and you still came out positive. So that's the first sign. That's really good. From there, I'm going to move you up a little bit in this table to the fund balance section. In the middle, and yep, right there, and you've got 4 rows. And the reason I usually point this area out is this is your year-end reserves. So what do you, not necessarily money in the bank, but if you collected all your receivables and you paid all your bills, this is what would be left. So this is what you get to live on going into the next year. So we do have to break it down into 4 rows though. That's why there's all these different classifications. Not to get too hung up on these. There's a shaded row there. That's the most important. But just to explain the other ones, just so you have perspective, you've got a non-spendable row. That's an offset to like delinquent taxes. Obviously, if you haven't collected your taxes yet, you can't spend it. So we set that aside and you got $1.9 million of that. And in prior years, you had some prepayments and items of that nature. Second item is restricted. If you have dollars on hand that you can only use for a particular purpose by an external party, you break it out there and you've got $62,000 of that. The next row is assigned. that is what you have internally set aside that you know you're going to spend for specific reasons in the next year. So you have about $1.6 million of specific items that you are carrying over into 2020. So we break that out as well because you already have a plan for those dollars. So what's left is the $17.2 million of unassigned fund balance. It's shaded because it's important. That is what we consider your true reserves. We can compare that to prior years. We can compare that to other counties that are of similar size and see how you're doing. So what do we do with that? We compare it to the second shaded row, the 38.8 million of what you spent. That's your expenditures for the year or your expense budget. And you come up with that ratio at the bottom. So this one will be important here too, because I know you talk about this during your budget cycle. You have a policy that you want to target 35% plus or minus 3%. So you're above your own policy, which is a good place to be. Gives you options. We have a rule of thumb we always preach to our counties, and that is you want a minimum. It's not necessarily a target, but you want a minimum of 33%. There's a variety of reasons why you want a strong fund balance. If you think about it, that's only 4 months worth of reserves. If you had to live on this, and if you think of the current situation, a COVID situation where you could potentially have an issue with resources, that fund balance has to carry you through those times. So that's why, for cash flow reasons, a whole bunch of reasons, you want this to remain strong. The average for the counties we work with, and we do work with about 42 counties in the state of Wisconsin, the average is right around 48%. So to give you a little bit of perspective, you're right in the ballpark of that. You're slightly below it, but you are above your own policy. So again, you do have some options available to you, and certainly you can do what you want in that regard. So that makes sense as far as, do you get a good feel for where the general fund is sitting at the end of 19?
Yep, looks good, Brock. Looks good.
Okay, I'll probably move you to the next page then. We'll talk a little quicker on some of your other funds here. Section 2 is your special revenue funds. I won't go through all these. Health and Human Services is always a big one for counties. You want to look at that, that one right there. So the current year change, you had a little deficit there of 86,000. Your overall trend over the last 4 years is pretty good compared to some of your neighbors. Something to keep an eye on, of course, but that gives you an indication on the budget for the HHS fund. That's not bad. I guess the only other thing to point out here, there's a few more funds in the special revenue section underneath that. You're kind of looking at the trend there to see what the story was. The first couple on there, aging programs and ADRC, for example, those were moved into the HHS fund in 2018 with the new finance system. So you just did some change of how you account for those dollars, stuff like that. And you can see some that started in 2018, same story there, the K-9 fund, St. Croix Valley Drug Task Force, County Drug Fund, those were all created and started new in 2018. So you'll keep an eye on those. In item number 3, you've got a capital projects fund. A lot of activity here. As I mentioned earlier, the general fund contributed $3 million to this fund during the year. I should back up a second here. What you're looking at is just year-end reserve. So this is your fund balance at the end of each year. So you can see that it dropped from 15.2 down to 14.0 million. But again, you had a lot of activity there. You issued $8 million of new debt, you may recall, during 2019. And then that combined with the $3 million coming in from the general fund and some other local sources, that was offset by about $13.3 million of capital expenditures. So again, you had a lot of different things going on. I saw before my presentation here, you talked briefly about the capital projects fund. I'm sure you touch base on those periodically through the year. The big item here in 2019 was the highway shop and equipment. That accounted for about $10.2 million of the spend in this fund during 2019. Last item on this page is your debt service fund. Again, here, similar story in 2018 when you combined a bunch of individual funds into one and just called it your debt service fund, which is more typical of counties actually to report just one. You also had a buildup of reserves in 2018. You can see that came down. That's, again, a planned spend down. You contributed $3.2 million of what you had in reserves at the end of 18 towards your payment of principal interest during 2019. So if you looked at your budget, there's an intentional spend down based compared to what you had regularly scheduled for principal and interest. All right, any questions on that? Because we're going to change gears here a little bit on the next page, but did it all make sense?
Still looks good, Brock.
Very good. Okay. So what I mean here on the next page, here's your nursing home. We got to change our thinking a little bit because before all those other funds we were talking about, that's governmental accounting. You probably heard that's a little different than some other types of accounting, private entities and stuff like that. Well, your nursing home follows full accrual. Most people are more familiar with this actually than governmental accounting. Because it accounts for things similar to any other private business. So now you have your brilliant depreciation. You also have long-term debt on the balance sheet, things like that. So you look at these a little bit different, but I'm going to point you to the main item, which is at the bottom of the page here. Again, we talk about what were the results for the year. So you look at that net change, change in net position. So you do have a negative there. So operationally, the nursing home fund will typically run a full accrual loss for the year. The reason that is it's very, there's a heavy depreciation expense load each year there. So you've got these large value capital assets on the book for example, the facility. You can see up above there's $19.5 million of capital assets. Every year that takes a depreciation charge and it slowly depreciates out until eventually it'll hit zero. But the reality is you continue to reinvest in it so that number stays at a positive throughout time. But you do take a charge each year to depreciate it. And that counts to your results for the year. So during 2019, you did have a depreciation charge of $576,000. So you could look at this as taking that depreciation charge out and say, well, what besides depreciation, how did we turn out? And that is pretty closer to break even. So you actually had a little positive if you pull that part out. You did have positive cash flow for the first time in quite a while in this fund. So if you looked at it purely from the in and out of cash in the bank, you would have had positive results, which is a good trend to have. If you remember now, you had the first full year of operations in the new facility, the full facility in 2018. So this is your second full year. Things appear to be trending in the right direction there, even though you do show an operational loss there. In an ideal world, you'd cover that so that not only are you covering cash flow so you can pay the bills, but you're also kind of recapturing some of the loss on your capital depreciation. So you're funding yourself for the next capital infusion or purchases down the road. Something to keep a look at. But all in all, there's some good signs there. All right, the last page I plan to cover here, now this is page 5. So here we talk about your highway department. Again, it is full accrual, so we look at it similar to we did on a nursing home. And here are a couple things, because you're going to see change in net position right in the middle of the page. You're going to see a very large number. So if you can find that there, 26.6 million. Yep, right there. That's very unusual, but as you know, this is primarily a capital contribution. So when the governmental funds, I talked about that capital projects fund earlier and how it spent $13 million towards the new highway facility and equipment. That was the 1-year contribution, but that was a multi-year project. It was completed and put into service in 2019. So at that point in time, you look at this fund and it takes it in as a revenue source. So this is contributed capital. This fund didn't pay for the capital assets, but it did receive it from the other governmental funds. So that's why this is a revenue source and a one-time item, capital infusion, if you will, into this fund. And that's why you're seeing this very large positive change in net position or positive results for the year. If you strip that part out, there was $25.6 million of capital that was contributed. That tells you that about $952,000 of the positive results was actually operational. So the revenues less the expenses for the year, that was still a positive, almost $1 million here in the highway department for 2019. So very good results there as well. Item 6 is your internal service fund. So these here, you're primarily assessing by looking at the trend from one year to the next. Do you have a positive or negative change in your reserves from one year to the next? That'll tell you whether or not the premiums or the charges you charge in each one of these funds is covering the claims or your expenses. So I think the one thing to note here, you'll see a negative that turned positive in your retirement health savings fund. That includes or is a result of largely of a $350,000 transfer in from the general fund. So that is to cover the costs there for 2019 in that particular fund. Last but not least, we're going to cover your long-term obligations there at the bottom. A couple things to note here. So you do have the first section here, you talk about your bonds and your notes and your state trust fund loan. These are your more traditional long-term debt obligations, right? You're paying the bank, or you're paying the state, or you're paying the bondholders. You'll see that number went up a couple $1 million. I noted before that you issued $8 million of new debt during 2019. Well, you also repaid $5.7 million of premium. So the net of that is that change there, a slight increase over last year. Couple rows down, you're going to see something called WRS pension asset/liability. That negative in 2018 is not a typo. That one's that is the story for all governments that participate in this program. So as a reminder to some of you, and this is probably new to others, but basically you are a participant in the Wisconsin Retirement System plan. Your employees participate. So you guys pay premiums, the employees pay their share of premiums into the plan, and all that is administered by the state. You don't administer it locally here, but there was a rule change about 6 years ago that said you have to bring on your small share of the plan on your books, and that's what this is. So if you look back 7, 8 years ago, you won't see this line item. This reporting standard brought this on the books a few years ago, and now you report the results of the plan, your small portion of it, your proportional share. And in 2018, that negative, even it's a little counterintuitive. We're talking about debt in this section. In 2018, there's actually an asset. That's why it's negative. So that tells you the overall plan was overfunded at the end of 18. The whole plan swung back in 2019, and now there's a liability out there, or it was underfunded at 12/31 of 19. So everybody changed that asset back to a liability, which is more intuitive to what we're funding here. You're funding post-retirement benefits, and that it typically is never overfunded, but it can be because Wisconsin has a pretty well-funded plan, and that we saw in 2018. So hopefully that anomaly makes sense, but that's what that represents. And the last item I'll point out here then is the very last percentage at the bottom. So there is a Wisconsin statute that limits the amount of debt that can be tax supported. So what does that mean? It means those bonds and notes up above that you're paying for with tax money, there's a limit to how much debt you can hold. And this tells you the percentage of that limitation you're sitting at. You're at 12.0% of your limit. That tells you have plenty of capacity should you need to borrow with tax supported or general obligation debt. But I'll tell you, for a county, it'd be pretty impractical to get to that 100%. Your mill rates would be very, very high because your debt service support would be very high as well. So the typical for counties can be anywhere from 5% to about 20%. So you're kind of right in the heart or right in the middle of that. Once you get up to 20%, that's about the highest we typically see for counties. All right, so I covered a lot of ground. Hopefully it made some sense. But I'm here at your disposal. So if you have any questions, we can talk about it. The rest of this report's just some informational information. So we don't need to cover that here tonight.
Questions? Wow, I think you passed the clarity test, Brock.
Hopefully.
Thank you very much. I think I understood most of what you were saying, so I thought it was very good. Thank you.
Good, good. Yeah. If you think of any questions and you can follow up with finance and administration and get that to us. We'll get back to you. No problem at all. We'll be back to talk to the full board here in September, I believe.
Correct. Thank you, Brock.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brock. Okay, let's move on to the next item, jail construction project update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we all know, there's several projects going on downstairs right now. One in the special needs cell area, which was the old gymnasium, and that one's coming along on schedule. I mentioned at public protection, really one of the biggest hurdles for us, is really the paperwork up front, doing the backgrounds on everybody, all the workers coming in. That's been quite a challenge, and quite frankly, some workers have not gotten in because of criminal history checks entering into the facility. So we've had to move some things around, but it's been no delays, and the companies have been very responsive to our concerns about what's happening as far as safety and security. One of the things that you'll also notice on the south side of the building by the sheriff's office is the expansion of the day report center. So with these projects, part of that funding was every time a citation is issued in the state of Wisconsin, a traffic citation, there's a column on there that's called the jail assessment fee. And a portion of any revenue from that goes into the jails throughout the state of Wisconsin for, it can only be bricks and mortar. So it's improvements of existing facilities in order for obviously housing and bookings and court procedures. So part of that whole group, I know it wasn't talked about specifically prior to, but that's where a lot of that is coming from, is the jail assessment fee. Yeah, and as far as the gymnasium area, again, that is scheduled for completion in November. Day report center, we hope to have somewhere around early September. And one of the reasons that we had talked about expansion of the day report center was not only the amount of people in and out of there, but we had some security issues, some hygiene issues, some sanitary, because it was so cramped. We had to make some changes, and then COVID hit, and that really drove the point home of separation. And completely shutting down the day report center, as we found out, is not all that practical, as well as obviously that trailer out there works well now, but that's not a long-term plan. So there's a YouTube video. So Jim had the foresight, Mr. Ellsbury, to set up a camera in the gym and show the progression, time-lapsed progression of the work and the progress within the gym. So, Mr. Witt. And you'll see this is really going to be looking over, right below the camera is the door to the gym. And you'll see 2 levels start to get built up. 4 cells on the bottom, 5 on top. And in each one of those, the front of each one of those is going to be a day room. Very small day room. If any of you have ever toured the facility, there's large day rooms in the other main blocks. This one's going to have a smaller day room. Inside that smaller day room is going to be a table and a few chairs secured to the ground, a kiosk where they can order phone calls, emails, commissary. So the stairs went up, and then that beam is going to be the second level. And you can see the cells progressing. There's that day room out front. Each one of those columns those are all filled with cement. So the metal came in and then in pumped all the cement to fill each one of them. It was actually a process I had not seen done before, but once it got going, the guys did a really impressive job of assembling. Each one of those units is going to have a shower, TV, a bunk. Here's that day room, that small day room out front. There's going to be a TV in each one of those as well. That's where, of course, they'll eat, time out. But each one of those cells is going to be self-contained. Again, the shower in there is something that the receiving cell, while it has one main shower, each one of the cells currently in receiving does not have that ability. When they're violent, they have to be moved. Of course, we're not going to force somebody to shower, so that can be problematic as well for hygiene in there. So that is a quick update on where we're at. You know, and I mentioned it too the other day that once it was like an onion, the more we started peeling, because again, with all those cells comes all door controls, water controls, electrical. And once we started peeling and redoing the pod area, that gave us some opportunity to rerun wires, combine areas. The Huber dorms were added on to in 2002. So there are certain controls, so we're running more from the far corner of the building now as I point directly back to the jail, more so than from the front entrance of the jail in. So it has been quite a project getting in there and really, in essence, cleaning some things up. There have been some patchwork over the years of additions, so this, in the long run, this is going to benefit us greatly. Mr. Chair.
Maybe you told us this, but what's the expected completion date, and are you going to do your little tour thing in the spring? Because I'm anxious to see all the changes.
So the day report center is going to be mid-September, so we're not far out. They're really going well on that. Mid-November should be the completion date for the special needs cells. And this whole time, about every 2 weeks, the jail inspector has showed up, has gone on a tour, has met with those workers in charge of certain areas. So we're also confident, and the jail inspector has talked about, in the past, jails or additions have been put on, and then the jail inspector shows up at the end and finds out they're not ready to open. And he comes back with a list. So he's actually been very ahead of the game for us. We've been in contact with him bi-weekly, where he's come in and he's pointed some things out, and that's got to change, that got to change. So while the workers are here, we're getting things knocked out. So by November, yes. If it works out, I'd like to have a tour even before we have inmates housed in there. I'm not sure how that specifically can be aligned with certain committees, but it'd be nice to get you be walking in the cells and seeing the actual living conditions of the inmates prior to them getting in there. And then, of course, February is the public protection walkthrough of the jail tour, inspection tour by the county board, which is by that committee by statute. So, but I'd like to get as many people in there as possible to actually walk in and, you know, see where the shower's at, see how the bunks feel, just so you know that they are being treated the way they should be treated, very respectfully. So.
Anybody have any other questions? I think we're good. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, let's move on to the next business item, the capital project plan for 2021 projects.
I'm sure everyone can read the numbers there on the screen, but this is the 5-year capital improvement plan. The resolution really is addressing, though, the first year of the plan, because it talks about the funding. And so the funding for 2021 projects is fully coming from either from grants that are planned to be received or from fund balance that's already in the KIP fund. So we're not going to be requesting any transfer of fund dollars or any debt issuance to cover 2021 capital improvement projects. The projects remain mostly unchanged from the presentation at the Committee of the Whole. I think I combined 2 line items and moved one from general building down to HHS, but the dollar amounts are all the same that were presented at the Committee of the Whole. So are there any questions that you wanted to follow up on from the capital improvement plan now that you had a little bit of time since then to digest all of the data?
I have a couple of questions, but I defer to my comrades on the committee if you have questions. Okay. First of all, I think the vast majority of the projects are really good. It was really nice to see a lot of consensus with the Committee of the Whole. I thought that was really good. The line item for the project, if I can read this, 10105, the 175,000 for the first part of the planning for phase 1. I guess my main question is as we look forward to the expansion that's eventually going to be needed, I think everybody was a little taken back at some of the size of the numbers, and not, understandably. But if that should, if we come up later on with a plan B or a plan C or some variation on the same theme, would that change that first phase in terms of the relocating the one lot and building the storage facility? Can you give us a little?
Yeah, I think I'll call up either the facilities director or someone from the sheriff's department to talk about that structure specifically, because I think that building they'll have more information on, and I think it has a longer term use. Really, no matter what phase or if the other phases are ever done. But I'll turn it over, I guess, to Jim Ellsbury here.
All right, here I am casually dressed. So the building that we're looking at, going to the north side of the property here, is a shared building. It'd be partially mine and then partially sheriff's use. As you might notice, I have little temporary buildings housing equipment and items around the parking lot here, because we're just cramped for space. There's no place to put anything more. We've got a couple of Connex boxes here from the build out of the jail, and so that's been really nice. But those are going to go away because they're really tacky. The sheriff, he has evidence containers. You've seen them. Again, we're container land out here. We have stuff that we have to keep and protect, and so we get temporary covers, or we get storage containers because we need a secure kind of weather type place to keep things. That building would take care of those issues for us and allow us to have a room to be able to work on a piece of equipment, or in his case to do a little bit more investigation on a vehicle that came in. It's pretty nasty when you see them out there in the wintertime having to do what they got to do. So we're looking to have it's a two-prong effort to get that building, and then I promise I'll take the temporary structures away.
And I think the other part of your question, Chairman Long, is would that building interfere with a different plan? So we had hired a contract architect to look at a lot of different options for us, and we'd gone through some different scenarios, whether a secondary building, different ways to add on to this building, and Jim can confirm this, but I don't believe any of those would have been in conflict with this storage facility building at the location that's being proposed.
Yeah, and it kind of makes the most sense the way that the building is today, with facilities being on this side with our loading dock, and then having the impound lot moved to the other side because we crisscross in the hallway all the time. I'm going somewhere over there, he's going his building over here. So, it's a time saver to have that. The way that the property's positioned, there's not a lot of growth going off to the north, but there definitely was going down to the south. So with the utilities coming in, so on and so forth, and then also having access to parking lot with secure elevators or something like that that we have planned for the next phases, everything to the south kind of made a little bit more sense than going to the north just because of size.
Next question? Sorry. Okay, so I guess, and maybe I'm alone in my thinking here, but there were, as I mentioned, the vast majority of these projects make perfect sense. There were a couple big ticket items that I was just a little concerned about, not necessarily by the nature of the project, because I think they're all good projects, but I'm concerned about the timing. One would be for the Glen Hills campground, which still is about a $500,000 project over 2 years. And then also the Lodex for the medical examiner. And again, I think they're both good projects, but it's a lot of money. And I'm just concerned about this particular economic environment that we're spending that kind of money, because we're spending taxpayer money, basically. It's not our money. And there's a lot of people that are really struggling to pay their bills, pay their mortgage and the rent payments. And I just don't feel it's a good time for these projects. And I would like to suggest that maybe we delay them. Like I said, they're good projects. There's a lot of good reason to move forward with them, but I really believe that we should at least consider delaying them. So I'd like to hear from my friends on the committee.
Mr. Chairman, all of the projects are certainly worthy, but these two projects, these are cash flow projects. This is money in the bank. If you've been looking at the data from Wisconsin Tourism, campgrounds are booked out in Wisconsin. A plan is afoot in Madison to figure out a way to have winter camping in Wisconsin because people want to get away. And you can't find openings at campgrounds. Even New Richmond is booked. And although that's a nice campground looking out over the lake, it's not exactly the best equipped, but we're working on it. However, Glen Hills is a popular area. People like to get away. If we build it out, they will come, and we will get our money back, probably more so. If COVID continues, the demand for campgrounds and facilities associated to campgrounds is going to be in high demand. We need to be prepared. As far as the Lodex goes, that is a cash cow waiting to happen in western Wisconsin. With the ability to contract with every other coroner's unit within western Wisconsin and perhaps Minnesota, we'd be flowing. We may have to create a larger coroner's office and exam rooms because the numbers on this are just incredible. And I strongly urge you to look up the Lodex, look at the data that's coming in from especially the eastern states where they have such equipment, and the amount of counties that are contracting with the counties that have them. New York State has great examples of the cash revenue that's coming in. Princess County has a Lodex, and they are happy because their books are showing the cash flow that's coming in, especially with COVID and because we have autopsies, which are often called for because we do not know the cause of death. And as the public is screaming for actual fact on was it COVID, was it an upper respiratory condition, was it pneumonia, what exactly was the cause of death? Because people are tired of hearing every death is COVID. And I can tell you from my own experience, there are far too many deaths that are drug-related or due to complications of a drug overdose, which are not properly vetted. With this machine, we have the ability to do that and so much more. This is an expenditure we can't afford not to make.
Administrator Witt, if you would maybe refresh my mind, I think to paraphrase, the money is there now, we're covered, and there's also a fairly good possibility of getting other counties to come in and use this item and get a little payback on that Lodex, and on the, I guess also on the parks. I'm in favor of going ahead with that too, as long as we're covered right now.
Yeah, as far as all of the 2021 projects, because of the foresight of the county to take excess cash reserves in prior years and move those over, as the auditor was talking about, we had moved $3 million in the prior year. Because of that, we have enough cash to complete all of the 2021 projects and into 2022 projects. So it's not a matter of cash flow at this point to complete any of those projects. So you're correct on that. And then the payback on the Lodex specifically, I think there's a lot of estimating and a lot of unknowns there. Yes, we fully expect that other counties will utilize that. And so that is part of the business model that our medical examiner has presented on that item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ken, can you also confirm, isn't there a grant for the Lodex as well as half of that cost, potentially?
Yeah, potentially. That's
Yeah.
that's the key word there. So I think we need to apply for that grant yet. We wanted to make sure we had the county funding side of it before we applied for the grant. But the project is contingent on getting part of that grant. So it's about $500,000 from the machine, $120,000 for building improvements. We're anticipating that the grant would cover 50% of the machine cost. So if we don't get the grant, the project would not move forward. Because I think part of the financial business plan modeling is that at 620, maybe the payback period is a lot longer. But at 370,000, the payback period is much more manageable.
Thank you. And if I have another question, actually another comment. I agree with Supervisor Ard's comments regarding the parks. I think we have a real opportunity to capture some of that revenue. Folks are going out and enjoying nature at this point in time. And so I would also support keeping those projects in the capital improvement plan for the 2021.
I too had concerns about spending those two significant funds, but understanding Administrator Witt's comments that the Lodex would only proceed if we got the grant. And is there a grant involved in the parks part also?
Yes.
Which unit is that?
It's a DNR grant for, excuse me, it's a DNR grant for the parks, and I believe,
Yeah, the grant is
Right.
projected at $249,500. We show it as one of the revenue sources in fiscal year 2022, offsetting the construction phase of that Glen Hills project. So again, those are contingent on receiving the grants. So those projects do not move forward when we do not get the grants.
And just so I'm clear, which project is this for the park? So this is number?
So project 74, 10074.
So it's 80,000 in 2021?
Yeah, so the 80,000 would be the design phase, so we would hire the architects to start the design. What I always remind you, though, is when we have a project that's listed over 2 years like that, we're going to spend the 80. If you authorize the project, the 80 is going to be spent, and we don't get that back if for some reason you decide not to do the project the second year. But we will know about the grant before we spend the 80.
That was going to be the other question. So we won't even spend the 80 without the grant?
We don't spend a penny until we have the grant.
Okay. I guess that answers my question, and you know, at the county board level, if everybody wants to amend and add, or not add, but subtract, they can do that at county board level, so I would recommend we move forward with the resolution as stated.
Second.
Second. One other quick question for you, Ken. I've been going back and forth all week on this, is do we do these projects while we have the cash to take care of them, looking at some of the borrowing that might be coming down the road, or do we hold off and hold on to the cash and wait and see what happens? So I'm interested in your perspective on that.
We have a very good system where we take excess cash and we move it into the KIP. As long as that process is continuing, we're going to be able to avoid borrowing for recurring projects and small projects like $500,000 projects. Those are small KIP projects. If the county board changes policy, though, and starts reallocating cash for other uses, if they decide there's a bigger policy demand somewhere else, then that will deplete the ability of the KIP to continue on a cash flow basis and will require borrowings. So it's really about prioritization that the county board has, and the county continuing to have good fiscal years where sales tax, where we had 2 record months, where sales tax is exceeding our expectation. That's one of the biggest things that are feeding into the excess cash that we end up having is really good sales tax years. So there's a lot of moving pieces there, but it really boils down to your policy as a county board of how you want to use that excess cash.
Okay, any other discussion? We have a motion on the floor to approve the resolution for the capital project plan establishing funding for 2021 projects. So let's vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to number 5, resolution amending personnel policies and procedures handbook.
Do you want to go to presentations, if you can? So in the agenda packet, it got missed to have there was a summary page of what was changed in each policy. So I will bring that up here, and then I'll review that with you. There's only one of the policies that had quite a few changes, but they were more grammatical and formatting. So we don't know if we need to do a lot of discussion around those, but anything you want me to explain further, just let me know. So the first one we'll cover is the flexible work arrangement policy. And that one was an existing policy already. What we basically did is just format it into the new format and changed minor language. So instead of saying, anytime we referenced HR director, we referenced HR department, and then we reformatted and added examples of the types of schedule flexibility. And other than that, that's primarily all we changed in the policy. Are there any questions on that one?
We'll go on to the next one then.
Oh, good. That's good. The next one's the classification plan policy, and this was also an existing policy. This one had more changes, but again, a lot of this was just formatting and word changes. The things I'll call out that were the bigger changes was for reclassifications and regrades. Currently, that's was only done as part of the annual budget process. Now it can be done as determined is needed throughout the year. So if a position becomes vacant and a department head decides they want to reclassify that position, they'll be able to do that at that time, of course, partnering with the HR and the county administrator. So it takes the limitation off of only one time a year can you evaluate the needs of your positions in the department. That was the biggest change outside of, like I said, just word changes.
I think it's important to point out the approval process on those. And so under the old policy, it would come up during the budget cycle. So you'd get a spreadsheet with a list of all of the changes. Reclassifications, I think, was just a report that the county administrator made. New positions the county or the admin committee would approve. So this actually has an admin committee approval on reclassifications. So they'll be brought throughout the year. There probably won't be that many of them. I mean, we really anticipate 5 to 10 a year is what an average would be. But they would be brought as needed, and they would be brought to this committee then for approval. So you still see them and you get a chance to vote on them.
And then we eliminated the reference to upgrades and downgrades, because really that's the same thing as regrades. So we took out those sections on upgrades and downgrades. I can keep moving along if no questions on that. And then the last one was actually a policy that did not currently exist in the handbook. It's the Information Technology Acceptable Use. And this was a policy that IT did have, but what this does is replaces the current Internet Code of Conduct policy in the handbook. Really, we didn't change anything in the policy that IT had or the Code of Conduct other than formatting and language modernization. Okay, all right. That was it. That one's a really long one, but again, it was just for formatting.
So do we want to entertain a I'm sorry.
I'll move
A
to
motion,
adopt.
please. Motion to approve. And second, Supervisor Ard. Any further discussion or questions? If not, let's vote. All those in favor of the resolution amending the Personnel Policies and Procedures Handbook signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Tara. Okay, let's move on to number 6, consideration of executive search proposals. I think you're on again. You might want to take your mask off.
Yep, exactly. So for this, there is, if you want to go to presentations again, there is a very rough draft of an Excel spreadsheet that I initially had just prepared earlier today for my internal use, but then realized that there might be a request for that for the broader group. So I apologize, this is not polished. It is some internal notes, but at least it gives you a breakdown of what I was looking at. So what I did is we only had 5 responses. We did send the opportunity out to a couple other agencies, and for whatever reason, either they didn't actually do these kind of searches or they didn't get back to us in time. We only had the 5 responses. So I don't know if you have it up. Is it not coming up for you? Oh, there it is. Okay. So I can just go through what I have here and then we can have a discussion, but there were the public administration associates. What I did is I took the search firm and then I put the cost and then the highlights that I identified going through the packets. So for them, their projected timeline or hire date would have been early January. They have a 12-month guarantee with hire. So what that means is, I reference that in all of them. They say that if within 12 months your candidate leaves the position, they will re-recruit and not charge additional consultant fees other than whatever it would cost to remarket the position. So they have that for 12 months, and then the president, Kevin Bruner, would be the one that would lead that search. That was one of the lower costing searches. That was 15.5 is what was quoted. And then GovHR, this is one of the larger agencies, I think, in the Midwest. They have a projected timeline or hire date of 12 weeks once we've hired them. They also have a 12-month guarantee with the hire. I did receive feedback from another county manager in Wisconsin that they were good to work with. This manager actually worked with them as a candidate. And then Dunn County has used them several times and for their HR director, their finance director, and some other positions, and they've been very satisfied with their service. The SVP, Charlene Stevens, would lead that search, and that one came in at $20,000. Next was Baker Tilly. I'm sorry, McGrath. I won't go over the ones that didn't give us a quote. Baker Tilly, their projected timeline or hire date was early January as well. They actually had a 2-year or 24-month guarantee, although this was not applicable to internal candidates. So if an internal candidate was to get the position and they leave within 6 months, they will not recruit for us without a fee. They had 3 directors that would be leading the search. 2 are regular directors, and then 1 was the actual firm director. And Chippewa County has used them in the past, and their HR director is a reference for them. And they were, again, one of the higher ones, but they do have a very all-encompassing service. Next, Move Group. Also, projected timeline or hire date for them. They did not actually have a specific one. They just said they have a 25-step process, but they didn't identify a time period. They had no reference that I saw in a hire guarantee, and their co-founder and president would lead the search. They were also, they were one of the least expensive. I missed one. I missed Slavin. Where did they go? Here it is, Slavin, yeah. Slavin, I didn't actually have a chance or find anyone I knew that had used them, so I wasn't able to get direct information. I know they recruited for Madison, but I haven't had a chance to connect with anybody there for Dane County. But they actually had a very short timeline, which might be desirable. It said 60 days from time we hire them to making an offer as their timeline. They also had a 24-month guarantee with the new hire. And their president, Bob Slavin, would lead the search, and then David Krings, who is a Midwest regional manager and he was a former county administrator himself, is now retired, would also partner. And then they have an HR consultant that would partner as well on the search. Baker Tilly and Slavin and GovHR were the higher ones, but they do have much more robust proposals that include a lot of different services than the other ones did. Any discussion or questions? How you proceed on that?
This was very interesting to me to try to flip through some of these. You can't read them in its entirety, but
right.
I have to say, and just from off the top of my head, I probably was most impressed with this Slavin management, primarily because the principal and the president would be the one leading the search. As well as the other gentleman who is a prior county administrator.
Mm-hmm.
So that seemed to be really attractive for me, for what I know about this process. Supervisor Peterson?
I guess I had a lot of the same feelings you did. The other thing, it seemed to me as I read through their proposal was much more detailed and felt far more comfortable with the help that they would be giving us. You know, they kind of spelled out exactly what they were going to do. So that was my take also.
The one other thing about Slavin, I saw that they do offer establishing an evaluation criteria for the candidate, and then they do a longer follow-up for no additional cost. So after the hire is made, they continue to offer some services and consultation after that time period as well. I see that the other ones did do that, but I think there was additional cost associated with it. And that might be why they're a little bit higher than the others, because that's included already.
That was goal setting, I believe, also they helped you with after you.
Supervisor Ard.
In regards to Slavin, I did not care for them at all. One, because I have a real itch when it comes to typos in your presentation, when you're going for this type of prospect in search. The other is that they are not close to Wisconsin, and we pay for travel every time they come to St. Croix County. We are responsible for hotel and travel. So that is an expense which has to be added in. The other that I did not care for is that their search area for candidate proposals being posted online or directed search, while it was very impressive, it was a limited list which closes, essentially to me, closed the doors for our candidates within the Midwest and certainly within Wisconsin. They have a targeted pool. Most search firms do, especially at this level. They have their resources where they have pulled candidates from before, and they will go back to those candidates. But I think what we really need to consider in choosing a firm is, one, of course, we want to look at the bottom line and cost, but we also want to look at where are their candidate pools coming from? How are they selecting their candidates? Where are they posting the job search criteria? So there were a number of them that I noted in going on their websites. They did utilize Wisconsin resources, which is wise, such as League of Wisconsin Municipalities, highly regarded in the state of Wisconsin, not just for municipal users, but because their job source for anyone has been extraordinarily productive in producing results for not only municipalities, but counties as well as state positions. And they're very, very affordable for advertising as that goes. But looking at the advertising resources, do we really need to be advertising in North Carolina? Do we want to be advertising in North Carolina? Or do we want to keep it a little closer to home? Because please remember that whatever county administrators come in for whatever prospective administrators come in to interview, first and foremost, they need to know Wisconsin law. They need to know Wisconsin government operations. It's how we do things here. There's no time for people to play catch up. So how far out do we want to go in the search? And I will say to you that having been on a number of searches, and I have worked with GovHR, I was very impressed with them. Baker Tilly does a wonderful job as well. But in my perspective, if we're going to spend $20,000 or possibly more, then I'm looking at GovHR simply because they have an excellent track record and they have a very resourceful and productive means of finding candidates that are suited to the specific position.
And to that point, like I mentioned, the two preferences I spoke to that have used GovHR were satisfied, very satisfied with their service. You did mention, though, maybe not wanting to do quite as broad or national search. I did receive some positive feedback on Public Administration Associates, but one of the feedback was that it is more focused on local. And so if you weren't as interested in a national search, they are less expensive, but they may be focused more on local. Just something to consider. Not local, like just this area, but in the Midwest.
That actually, Public Administration Associates, that actually stuck out to me from their proposal, was they talked consistently about local governments and Wisconsin governments and things like that. I don't know, I can't remember. I enjoyed the spreadsheet. That was very helpful. I think the rest of the board will probably like a spreadsheet like that. I think that, but, you know, I think there's value in having someone that's familiar with who we are in Wisconsin, what we do, and if this firm has a good reputation as well. It was reasonably priced, I think. I think one of the challenges with the prices for me as well was, I think it was the Slavin that said not to exceed, this is our not to exceed cost, but other ones had a price, but there was add-ons and things like that. So sometimes I think it's going to be hard to figure out actual cost based on what services we end up using, which we might not know for sure at the beginning.
And within any proposal process, if we select a company, we are able to write that within our response to their proposal, that we are accepting your proposal at a cost not to exceed. Mm-hmm. So then what would happen is on the first meeting of whichever committee is going to, formed committee to deal with this, that would be expressed before or during the time that the contracts for services would be signed.
So when you looked at these, did you have kind of a recommendation or any preference at this point in time, Tara?
I think it determines if we aren't looking, the reason Public Administration Associates was not one of my top 3 initially was because I didn't know how broad we wanted to reach, but knowing that we might want to not go national, I think that their costs, their 12-month guarantee, their president would lead the search. I'm not saying that's the number 1 recommendation, but I was looking at initially was GovHR and, because like I said, I've talked to people directly that have used them, and Slavin were the 2 that I've heard the most about. So I don't have a number 1 recommendation. I do think if cost and local are something we want to consider, then maybe public administration might be the way to go, because they have both of those. They're not going to do this broad national search, but they're going to give you a service, and they're going to focus on local municipalities.
Supervisor Peterson.
I'm having trouble resolving a thought here, and that is, when we first thought about, we had no entity, and there was some consideration, maybe even selecting without putting out a search. And then we decided, okay, we're going to search. We need to give our taxpayers their due. So I'm wondering in the back of my mind, is it fair for us then to say that, we want to shop local? That's a noble thought, I guess, but I'm having trouble resolving that in my mind, because I'm thinking, well, maybe it doesn't make sense to go national, but if it's there and it's available, I am thinking, do we have the right to make that decision that we're going to restrict? So that's my thoughts.
I'd also have to say I'm drawn to the short time frame of Slavin. The sooner we can move this along and resolve it, I think the better off we're going to be in many respects. So that would be another, and I don't have any problem going national. I mean, let's just, I don't, have any problem with that at all. If you find the right person, doesn't really matter to me where they come from. I do think it's important, though, that we try to make a selection and not go through the interview process, because that'll do nothing but drag the whole process along even farther, even more. I'm sorry, Supervisor Ard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the considerations to give is if you go national, we will be paying airfare and hotel for candidates coming into St. Croix County. That is expected at this level of interview. And so that is a cost to consider. It is not limiting the search necessarily just to Wisconsin. And what happens in searches at this level, if you look at the National Association of Counties, if you look at Wisconsin municipalities, any sites such as that are going to, anyone who's looking to be in this area is already going to be on those publications tracking their position posts. On LinkedIn, everyone mentioned we're going to do LinkedIn, we're going to do some type of social media format through the county, through our resources. That was mentioned in every presentation, as well as a number of industry-related publications, which are either online or hard press. But print, I'm telling you, print costs money. Ink and paper ads cost money. They're often overlooked. That magazine may come into an office and sit on a desk for weeks before it's ever even moved. Online advertising has been extraordinarily effective in finding position placement. So for those firms, and all of them appeared to embrace technology for using online advertisements. And we have a number of resources within St. Croix County to utilize for posting and publicizing this announcement. And believe me, this will not go unnoticed. Once this hits the press, this story is going to fly, because St. Croix County has its own reputation. So I think in looking at this, yes, let's be cost effective. GovHR has representatives in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. Public Administration Associates, they're out of Wisconsin. Those are two firms that are right at our back doors, back and front doors, so to speak. That cuts our costs significantly while still offering the services that we need. And at this point, as I said previously, we have the ability to say to the firm, we would like A, B, C, D, and E, and we'll do it for this price.
Supervisor Cook?
I think it's important to note, too, that in the public administration proposal, it doesn't say that they won't go nationally. I think when it talks about where they'll place advertisements in their publications, it mentions ICMA, NACO, various public administration programs across the country. So I don't believe at any point in their proposal they were saying they will not go national, but I think they just have the local experience and it's closer. So that's what drew me to it, I guess.
Yeah, first off, I appreciate the spreadsheet, and, I spent a lot of time reading these, and out of all these, and I never even paid any attention to the cost, because I wanted the best firm. GovHR was the one that impressed me, so I just was impressed by that, and that seemed to be my best fit.
Okay, other comments? Discussion?
I guess the
Opinions?
tipping point for me was with Slavin was the two very experienced former government administrators and the time frame. So I'm still leaning that way.
And I would agree with you there. I think the principles were key to me as well as the time frame. The cost was very reasonable, and I would lean in that direction as well.
I guess on that note, I would make the motion that we select Slavin and bring it to the floor, at least with a second we can vote on it, one way or the other.
I will second that. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to select Slavin Management. More discussion. Supervisor Cook?
Just to clarify, Slavin was the most expensive proposal, right? Of the ones the 5 that we received?
About 4,000 more, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
Baker Tilly and Slavin were the two most expensive. They're very similar. Slavin was 24,355. Yeah. And Baker Tilly was 23,500.
Okay, any other further discussion? Let's take a shot. Maybe we should just do a roll call vote in case we've got mixed votes here.
I guess I'll speak. Supervisor Peavy,
Yes.
Supervisor Peterson,
Yes.
Supervisor Ard,
No.
Supervisor Cook,
No.
Supervisor Long.
Yes.
3-2, the motion passes. And procedurally, this does not go to the county board. This is approved at the committee level.
And then we'll look forward to, I'm assuming we'll hear from you, Tara, on the next steps in the process.
Yes, I was wondering, is there going to be a subcommittee is it going to be this committee that's going to be the primary hiring committee, so I know who would be my primary contact, or is there going to be another subcommittee?
We haven't really talked about that, and I don't know that we can because it's not on the agenda.
Oh, true. Okay, sorry.
But we will definitely address that ASAP. Thank you.
Is there direction somewhere where that committee? I'm wondering who would be responsible. Does Corp Counsel want to weigh in on that, or?
Sure. So in the resolution that was adopted by the board, and I've got it up on my other screen here. So the committee was charged with hiring the search firm, which you've made a motion to hire Slavin. And then the committee is delegated with the task of overseeing the process of conducting a search for a successor county administrator with the support of the governmental executive search firm and the support of human resources. So I think that what you should do, and Tara can weigh in on this, is schedule a meeting with the successful contracted search firm to appear with human resources, and then decide what kind of committee you're going to create or interview panel process with the aid of human resources and the search firm. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. I think you decide, I think you should line up, with the aid of your executive search firm and HR, schedule a meeting probably before, certainly before your next meeting scheduled in September. And so that you can work with the person to set up how you're going to conduct this process. Because I'm sure Mr. Slavin will have some recommendations for you as well as HR.
Okay, wonderful. Let's move on. I got to keep my timing average down here. Number 7, a report by Public Information Officer on integration of new role in support of county communications. Adam.
Thank you, Supervisor Long, and thank you, supervisors, for having me. I'm going to give you a brief update on how we've leveraged the PIO position since I started and where I kind of see that position growing in the months and years to come. So since I started this position 2.5 months ago, I've been developing relationships with our departments and employees to learn what they need to serve our residents better. I've also been reviewing the analytics of how our visitors have been interacting with our county online. Together with this information, this will help us lay the foundation for our communication strategy. The goal of this strategy will be to create a culture of information sharing between departments and unified messaging to our residents and visitors. We're still developing this strategy, but so far I've partnered with, advised, or produced communications for public health, the healthcare campus, the ADRC, behavioral health, the sheriff's office, community development, human resources, and on behalf of my own office in the administration department. I've been working with our teams to provide guidance on how to best communicate with each other using video conferencing and collaboration tools. I've also experienced, since I started, I've experienced and communicated about 3 different emergency declarations in my 2.5 months here. So this obviously accelerated my need to develop connections with the local media, issuing press releases and setting up interviews for TV, radio, and print. Joining the county in the middle of a pandemic was definitely interesting. I've been devoting much of my time to public health for this very reason, helping them update their public health advisory, addressing frequently asked questions to generate FAQs on our website, and sharing important data about the impact of COVID-19 in our county. There's been a lot that we have accomplished so far, but we still have a lot ahead of us. Where I would like to see us move forward with this position, I would like to start by finalizing our communication strategy and revisiting our communications policy, and this will help improve our communication workflow for the county. We will be implementing surveys both internally and publicly, and use this data to make informed decisions about what, how, and when we communicate. We will finish the assessment of our web content and plan to refresh our public website. This will result in a more searchable, usable, and accessible website. And finally, we will leverage the use of video and other communication methods that are underutilized by the county to better share information with our employees and residents. I've had no shortage of work since I've started, but I look forward to see what the months and years have to show. Thank you.
Questions? Supervisor
Your
Ard?
plan is well laid and has a great focus. I'm looking forward to seeing all of us communicate in a much better channel or channels as you go forward. This is very exciting. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Thank you, Adam. I know that there's probably 95% of the population in this county don't have a clue what's going on. And it would be really nice to be able to reach them in better ways so that they have some understanding and appreciation for the services that the county provides. So thank you.
Yep, definitely. And that's one of the definite goals of this plan. And since I've started, we've grown our online audience. Looks to be between 35 to 40% just through social media. So that's a significant increase. And we're definitely not going to sustain that level of increase, but hopefully we will have a sustained growth moving forward so we reach a larger audience.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Adam?
I just want to say thank you also.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the last business item on our agenda, the resolution establishing the county administrator work plan for September 1, 2020 through August 31, 2021. Would you like to comment?
Sure. So the county administrator and I had been working on developing this before his departure. I don't think the work in the county stops, though, just because we have an interim county administrator. So I brought this forward. These would be the things that we would continue to work on, whether myself or a successor if one's named. So the mission of the county continues on, and these were the ideas that we had brought forward as the top ideas going forward. The fourth one was replaced by Supervisor Long's suggestion from last month. But if you had any other questions on these or additions or subtractions to them, I'd be happy to entertain that.
Anyone have any suggestions? I think they're good. I'm very happy with it. And anyone else? How about a motion to approve the resolution?
I would move to approve the resolution establishing the county administrator's work plan for September 1st, 2020 to August 31st, 2021.
I have a second by Supervisor Peavy. Any further discussion? Let's vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Request for future agenda items. I'm sure we'll have plenty over the next couple months, but anyone have any specific requests? Announcements and correspondence.
I do have one. If you notice, Leah Simonton sitting at the end of the table here. She's our Assistant Finance Director. One of the things the auditor had mentioned was incompatible functions. And so as Assistant County Administrator, one of my roles is Finance Director. I serve that role. There's a lot of things, though, grants, internal workflows with our IQM2 system that require the Finance Director and the County Administrator to sign off separately. So it's an incompatible function for me to maintain both the interim County Administrator and the Finance Director. So I will be naming Leah Simonton as the interim Finance Director while I'm interim County Administrator. So Leah brings with her 20 years of accounting experience and 6 years of experience in government accounting, working at the county level. So we'll be in good hands with her assuming that role on the interim basis.
Wonderful. Yeah. Any other announcements or correspondence?
Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry. Yes.
So we'll be setting up as soon as the contract is finalized with Slavin. I would assume that we're going to be scheduling a meeting with the committee to define what the process is going to be. So just that, so everybody's aware of that. I assume that's what Tara's direction is going to be, correct, Tara?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Okay, anything else? I think we can adjourn for the evening, and our next meeting, our next regularly scheduled meeting will be on Tuesday, September 15th, but we'll probably see you before then.